We oppose it because all those pieces of legislation were a direct violation of the Second Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Plain and simple. It doesn't say the right to keep and bear muskets shall not be infringed. It doesn't say shall not be infringed unless Democrats say this weapon looks so scary we have to get rid of it. It doesn't say that at all. It says shall not be infringed. We said this in the last markup on legislation where the Democrats were trying to infringe on Americans, law-abiding Americans' Second Amendment liberties. We said the Democrats' beef is with the Second Amendment. If you want to change the Second, you want to get rid of the Second Amendment, go try a constitutional amendment. See how far you get with that. But instead, no, you come with these pieces of legislation. If this legislation becomes law, millions of firearms that Americans legally own today will be illegal. Under this bill, if you give one of those legally owned firearms to a family member or a friend or a neighbor, you could end up in federal prison for 5 years if you don't go through an FFL for a background check prior to letting your grandson use your firearm. Think about that. Millions of guns that fit the description of those outlined in this bill are in the homes of law-abiding Americans as we speak right now. This bill would send these lawful firearm owners to prison if they try to give a neighbor or sell them to a friend. Not only would this legislation strip Americans of their rights, but it would do nothing to make our community safer. We know that because Democrats tried it before. They tried it with the, quote, assault weapons ban in 1994. And guess what? That ban was found to be ineffective in reducing violent crime. A congressionally mandated study concluded that the banned guns were never used in more than a modest fraction of all gun murders, before the 1994 ban, and that the law's 10-round limit on new magazines was not a factor in multiple victim or multiple wound crimes. The bill before us today repeats the same assault weapon ban and limits new magazines to 15 rounds. Democrats know this legislation will not reduce violent crime or reduce the likelihood of mass shootings, but they are obsessed with attacking law-abiding Americans' Second Amendment liberties. For over 30 years, the Democrats have been running a propaganda campaign to make people believe that, quote, assault weapons are a specific class of firearms that no one needs to own. In reality, assault weapons is a message-tested phrase made up by the political class to advance its anti-gun agenda. In 1998, gun control advocates at the Violence Policy Center made up the term assault weapon to stoke fear and exploit public confusion about commonly owned rifles. These advocates stated that this confusion can only increase the chance of public support for restrictions on these weapons. Just last week, in a moment of candor, the Associated Press cautioned avoiding terms like assault weapon and assault rifle because they are highly politicized and convey little meaning about the actual functions of the weapon. Despite what gun control advocates claim, semi-automatic assault weapons are not designed to spray fire. They are not designed to be fired from the hip. They are not high-powered. They are not equipped with grenade launchers and rocket launchers, as some have said. The notion that adding certain accessories to an otherwise lawful rifle can somehow turn that rifle into an assault weapon is illogical and wrong. Proponents of gun control label standard capacity magazines sold with commonly owned firearms as, quote, high capacity or large capacity magazines. The overwhelming majority of magazines sold with rifles and handguns have the capacity to accommodate between 15 and 30 rounds of ammunition. Both semi-automatic assault weapons and large-capacity ammunition feeding devices have been used for self-defense purposes. This legislation will not make our communities safer. It will, in fact, make them more dangerous. In 2019, there were 386 self-defense killings that were determined to be, quote, justifiable homicides by investigators and prosecutors. In 2013, a study ordered by the CDC and carried out by the National Academies Institute of Medicine and National Research Council found that annual defensive uses of a firearm range numbered up to 3 million. This number has likely gone up since then as more states have passed laws allowing law-abiding citizens to carry a concealed firearm. And most importantly, the very types of firearms we are discussing here today have been used in numerous self-defense situations just this year. On July 7th, 2022, a Florida homeowner fired his AK-47 style rifle when individuals forcibly entered his home. After the homeowner opened fire, the individuals immediately fled. When asked if the homeowner would face charges, Escambia County Sheriff Chip Simmons said, absolutely not. The homeowner's protecting himself, and in Florida and in Escambia County, you can protect yourself. On April 8th, 2022, a man in Melbourne, Florida, Sitting at his truck, in his truck outside a friend's house, was confronted by an angry acquaintance who opened fire on him. The man grabbed his own handgun and shot back. When the handgun jammed, the man retrieved his AR-15 from his backseat and started shooting back. The man maintained defensive fire until the assailant ran away. Police were able to arrest and charge the assailant. No one was injured. On April 7, 2022, in Brownsboro, Texas, a homeowner armed with an AR-15 rifle confronted a suspect who broke into his home by smashing through glass of the front door. The homeowner held the suspect at gunpoint until the police arrived. Democrats get their way, law-abiding Americans would be prevented from using these weapons to defend themselves against violent intruders in their homes. Prevented from defending themselves, their family, their property because of this legislation. This legislation is dangerous. It doesn't square with the Constitution, with the Second Amendment in any way, and it has failed in the past. Because of all that, I urge my colleagues to vote against it. I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I find it amazing that the gentleman from Ohio would argue that we shouldn't give appropriations to the Department of Justice. Congress votes appropriations for every department. And if you think the Department of Justice is not being run properly, well, there's a presidential election coming up. That's the purpose of elections. And at the present time, the American people, 2 years ago, elected Joe Biden president and Kamala Harris vice president, and the president appointed the Secretary of Justice and the chairman of the FTC, both of whom I think are doing an excellent job, but it's a matter of debate which can be decided in the next presidential election. And to argue that we should starve agencies of the United States government so that they cannot do the job for which Congress passed statutes mandating them to do the job is absurd. And all that the increase in fees does is update, because the last increase of fees was I don't know how many years ago, and there's been inflation, and we need the enforcement against the large big tech companies because, as Mr. Jordan already acknowledged, they represent a threat. I think he thinks they represent a different threat from the one I think they represent, but everybody agrees they represent the threat, and their power must be properly supervised by proper enforcement of the antitrust laws. I reserve.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I would just point out, I didn't say that Congress shouldn't appropriate dollars to federal agencies. What I said is we shouldn't give more money to the DOJ in light of what we've seen them do, in light of what 14 whistleblowers have told us over the last several months, what they're up to. That's a completely different point. I'm all for looking at ways to cut certain agencies and reduce government and the power that they have, but I didn't say that. I just said we shouldn't be giving them more money, for goodness sake, in light of what they've been doing. I think that's a pretty reasonable position. Frankly, a position I think the vast majority of the country would have when they look at the actions they have seen from their Department of Justice and the tax money that supports that agency. Again, we reserve, Madam Chair.
On the ANS, I'll be very brief. I won't use my 5 minutes. I'll simply express my shock at what I just heard from Mr. Roy. When he talked about using guns to fight tyranny, he's talking about turning guns on American troops. Turning guns, we ought to be able to shoot American troops. I find that shocking.
Thank the chairman. Look, the problem with politicians, especially in D.C., is that they tell the American people that we can protect them from harm, protect them from every aspect of evil, from every tragedy, that we're never going to let a bad thing happen again. And the people in this committee say effectively today that they can stop evil, that we must do something. But they've admitted here multiple times by multiple parties that it's all a pretext to ban weapons. If this were about policy, if it really were, we'd be addressing facts, right? 2% of prosecuted federal criminals have bought their weapons through retail purchases, less than or just over 10% of state criminals. About 0.8% of criminals obtained their weapons at a gun show. Crime in San Francisco is facing a recall vote of the DA. Why? Police making arrests and only 8% of crimes reported there. Homicides are up 36%. 2021 arson is up 40% compared to 2019. In San Antonio, crime is skyrocketing. Cops won't even refer to the DA drug crimes because they won't prosecute them. In Chicago, why isn't the U.S. attorney and the DA there? focusing on straw purchases and other crimes to address the 800 plus homicides. Straw purchases are already a crime for people who are prohibited from owning a firearm. Police have been verifiably defunded in Austin to the tune of $150 million. We have 107,000 deaths and skyrocketing from fentanyl pouring across our border. Thousands and thousands of Americans. We have documented homicides by hands and knives more than rifles. I say that again. Hands and knives documented homicides are greater than rifles. We have a cultural rot in this country, yet this legislation focuses on targeting law-abiding Americans. It would make it baseline unlawful to obtain a gun for a non-family member, friend, or acquaintance, regardless of their eligibility, like current law requires. Maybe a spouse of a military service member, like my friend from Kentucky mentioned. It would make me a criminal several times over, living as I do today. For example, here I've got in this room actually a 20-gauge single-shot shotgun and a 22 lever action. I've got these right here, and I have them sitting here in the room, out, exposed. Why? So I can go kill a snake. So I can go kill a coyote. So I can go do what I need to do and kill things, because that's what guns are for. I've got both of those guns, and I've had them since I was 9 years old. And you know what? My children, who are under the age of 18, they know that those guns are to be used only to go kill a snake, to go kill a coyote, to go protect their dog if it's being chased down or tracked down. That's why we have guns. And you're saying if I leave my 20 gauge or 22 sitting out and I have a 12-year-old son and I don't have that locked up, oh gosh, sorry, we got a coyote. Let me go get the key to go unlock it. That is straight up bullshit, to quote Mr. Cicilline. That's what it is. And that's what you're doing to the American people. Look, now you've got part of the provision that says you're going to set the age. We've already had a robust debate about that. I got a 45 when I was 18 years old. I guess I somehow managed to get through. The fact here is this is really about the left's culture war against gun owning and supporting Americans. That's what it's about. And it's about refusing to acknowledge the fundamental reason and the purpose for the Second Amendment. This is not specifically about hunting or self-defense, but even defense against tyranny. I don't accept the term weapon of war regarding the AR-15. It's not. It's used for hunting primarily. It's the most popular rifle. But even if it were, depriving the American people of the weapon, the stated goal of most or all committee Democrats today, and the target of magazines greater than 10 in this very bill to do so, then what are the citizens supposed to do if the government is tyrannically trampling their rights? What are we supposed to do? What should Americans do if the government, in conjunction with, say, international organizations, attempt to lock us in apartment buildings like they do in China to stamp out COVID? What do the American people do? In history, this is replete with examples. The Soviet Union established gun control, and from 1929 to 1953, they massacred 20 million people. Turkey, the Armenians, 1.5 million people. We know about Germany and gun control and what it meant for Jews and in that part of the world, in Germany and Austria, Poland, and throughout Europe. We have China establishing gun control in 1935, and another 20 million people were massacred. Evil is evil. And what do we know about the Uvalde shooter? It was a psychotic, evil 18-year-old who talked about raping women, killing defenseless animals, and was willing to gun down fourth graders. We have a cultural rot in this country. We're stripping the dignity of work, the role of fathers in raising sons, the abuse of drugs, the missing community to stop a boy from being MIA from school, not working while sitting around playing Call of Duty and abusing animals. In order to seek the American people, tell American people a lie, that the government will protect them, half of this committee is willing to take away a citizen's God-given right to protect himself or herself from harm, and importantly, from the very tyranny being applied to them to deny that right. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize myself on the ANS. I'll be very brief. I won't use my 5 minutes. I'll simply express my shock at what I just heard from Mr. Roy. When he talked about using guns to fight tyranny, he's talking about turning guns on American troops. Turning guns, we ought to be able to shoot American troops. I find that shocking. I yield.
President, overall, South Korea has done 5 times more tests than the U.S. per capita. Why is that?
I don't think that's true.
That is true. And you said this morning that the White House said the U.S. passes South Korea in virus testing.
Who are you with?
Yahoo News. And it's not true per capita.
Do you want to respond to that? If you have the numbers.
Sure, I have the numbers. So remember early on, we pushed tests to the outbreak areas, just like he described. His primary outbreak was in Miami-Dade and Broward County. and Palm Beach, so they pushed test into that region. We did the same thing in the United States. So if you look at every single state that had an outbreak, their testing is greater than anywhere in the world. They're in the 42 per thousand range.
Your point is taken about individual areas, but overall, we've had 14 times more infections than South Korea. So are we doing something wrong, and why is that? They have a very dense population.
Yeah, our epidemic looks much more like the European epidemic. So right now we're tracking very close to the countries in Europe, and we're testing at their rate of their concentrated epidemics and where they're occurring in the metros. I think it really shows the susceptibility of our major cities in the same way they were susceptible in Europe. And so we've been very focused on that. That's not to say that we're not supporting the rural states. We're very much supporting the rural states and very much supporting their testing. There's no state right now in the United States that's tested really less than 1%, which is pretty remarkable when they don't really have significant cases. So to our Yahoo gentlemen, I just want to make it clear that South Korea's testing was 11 per 100,000, and we're at 17 per 100,000. So
Are you going to apologize, Yahoo? That's why you're Yahoo, and nobody knows who the hell you are. Go ahead, let's go.
Based on the
Jeff.
numbers
Go
I've
ahead.
seen,
That's
that's
why
not-
nobody knows who you are, including me. Go ahead.
Mr. President,
just check it again.
You ought to get your facts right before you.
Well, we
make a
have
statement
had
like that.
14
Okay, well, your
times
facts are
infections
wrong.
than that.